Hey friends, did you know that Feminist Frequency recently launched the Games and Online Harassment Hotline? Well, we sure did. It is a confidential, text-based emotional support resource for folks who make and play games. You can learn more at gameshotline.org, and please, please help us spread the word so we can reach the people who need it the most.
This film does not traffic in any subtleties whatsoever. If you wonder if something means what you think it means, it does.
Yes.
And they're going to underline it and they're going to put a pin in it.
Welcome to Feminist Frequency Radio. This is the show that asks you to be critical of the media you love. I'm Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm joined today by two women who would really rather stay home than follow you to your super secret dance club deep in the heart of Los Angeles. Carolyn Pettit.
Yeah, hell to the no. Hell to the no.
And Ebony Adams.
Even if there is no bloodbath that's going to make its way into that club, I still am not interested.
Yeah. Cool. This week, we're going to be talking about the 1998 Wesley Snipes hit Blade, which all of our Patreon backers had an opportunity to vote on. So this episode is courtesy of all of you. Mm-hmm. Stay tuned. Hello, friends.
Hey.
Hello.
Yeah. So
Let's bring it.
What's new? What's new in life?
I need some more of that Halloween energy. Let's ramp it up. Come on, ladies.
I mean,
Jesus.
Before we get into, so I will say I'm in this weird place right now, like emotionally and psychologically and everything, where it's like I know that I have absolutely no reason to not be as depressed and anxious and terrified and angry and everything as I have been for months. And yet, I'm knocking on wood here, like for whatever reason, and there is no reason, like there's literally no reason, I'm feeling a little bit better, like just a little bit less like terrified, a little bit less miserable, a little bit less like constantly on edge about just everything. So, whatever. I'm just going to try to like not question it too much, just enjoy it. And I think maybe part of it is that I have been, I kind of forcing myself most days to go on brisk long walks, which I think have they have the benefit of like getting me out of my head and into my body for a while. Part of my problem has always been that I'm, because of a lot of like childhood trauma and stuff, I'm very hypervigilant. I'm always on edge. And so my nervous system is always like, it never shifts into it's always in fight, flight, flee mode or whatever. It never basically shifts into the kind of just like low-key, whatever, standard operating that most of us are supposed to spend most of our lives in. I don't experience that most of the time. I feel like the daily walks, at least for now, are helping me get a little bit closer to that than I usually am. So that's, whatever. It's a nice, I don't feel great by any means. I just feel marginally less terrible, and I'm grateful for it.
Sometimes that's all you can do is, like, hey, I'll take marginally less terrible.
Yes. Yes.
It's a win.
I also just want to kind of add to that a little bit of like, that is awesome that you recognize that in yourself and that you'll just like appreciate this while it lasts kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I found that during this isolation times, that my ups and downs are just so much more frequent. And I just have to keep reminding myself that when my downs happen, that there will be ups again.
Yes.
It's not linear. And so, really acknowledging and feeling good or, feeling a little bit better than terrible is something to celebrate for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that it'll come again,
Right. Exactly. There's on YouTube, there's a YouTube channel. It's not a huge YouTube channel. It's a pretty small YouTube channel, but it's this, he bills himself, his name is Douglas Block, and he's like, an older dude. He's like in his 70s, and he bills himself as like a depression recovery expert or something like that. And, one of his mantras is "this too shall pass." Just like the way when you are depressed, it's very easy to get into the mindset of like, this is going to last forever. I'm never going to get better. I'm going to be miserable like this forever. And, you know, to have those reminders, and often we need them to, when we're at our lowest, we need them to come from outside of ourselves. But because we can tell ourselves that this too shall pass, but we won't believe it. But nonetheless, like trying to hold to that idea that, like, or that fact really, that, you know, that those states of deep depression are like impermanent, right? And so anyway, it like little nuggets of wisdom like that too are kind of providing me some solace and comfort and support in these difficult times.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Carolyn.
Yeah.
How about we talk about some fucking vampires now?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, the year was 1998. 9 years after Tim Burton's Batman had ushered in a grim new era for superhero films. 10 years before the Marvel Cinematic Universe would kick off with 2008's Iron Man, and 20 years before Black Panther would give us another film centered on a Black superhero from the pages of Marvel Comics. The time was right for Blade, a film that would tap into audiences' appetites both for grimdark superhero films and for violent supernatural action. Star Wesley Snipes was perfectly cast as the stoic daywalker, Blade, who uses the tools created by his grizzled mentor, Whistler, in his battle against the secret world of vampires. Blade and Whistler spend their spare time trying to out-masculinity each other, while the upstart Deacon Frost threatens the established hierarchy of power among vampires and aims to usher in a new era of global vampire dominance. I would like to start...
Do it.
I would like to start with Roger Ebert, if I may.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
So I went and read Roger Ebert's review of Blade just out of curiosity. And the opening paragraph is really interesting. And I kind of just wanted to share it as a framing for the film, maybe like in retrospect, I guess. He says, at a time when too many movies are built from flat TV-style visuals of people standing around talking, movies based on comic books represent one of the last best hopes for visionary filmmaking. It's ironic that the comics, which borrowed their early visual style from movies, should now be returning the favor. And I was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, what movie did you watch? His review of Blade is pretty glowing.
Yeah, I saw that he liked it. But I mean, we have to remember that too, that was before the MCU, and really before, and it's like now superhero films feel, to me anyway, kind of blasé. So, but here's the one thing that I really liked about Blade, and is its visual style and sensibility. And what I mean by that is not just that the action scenes, I think, are like, you know, stylishly presented and whatnot, and well choreographed and kind of fun to watch, which I think they are. But more than that, like, there's real thought given to the production, like the look of the film. Specifically, it's the way that Blade and Whistler, you know, but Blade's world in Los Angeles is a world of like old cars, old buildings. Mm-hmm. When you see the city as Blade inhabits it, it's you know, the contemporary Los Angeles, obviously, of the film, you know, 1998, but it feels like it feels kind of like it sort of reminds me of like the city from Seven, or the city like this, just sort of like a kind of an American city that's not rooted in any specific time, but certainly isn't like of the now. It's this, and meanwhile, you can contrast that with the world of the vampires, who are all sleek architecture, skyscrapers, you know, obviously techno music, computers, you know, high tech, like very, very modern. There's really an interesting, like, and very deliberate contrast going on in the film visually between those two things. And what this film made me realize is that part of my problem with the MCU, part of my boredom with the MCU, is that because all of those films have to exist in the same universe, not just literally, but kind of tonally, and so they all share like a similar look and feel, right, for consistency, like they're all episodes of the same TV show, essentially. There isn't room in the MCU really for filmmaking, for there to be individual films that feel distinctly different tonally and do really interesting things with their production and look, in the way that I think Blade does. So
it's very interesting that you point that out, because I think, you're absolutely right. But I think one of the things that the Marvel TV shows, or rather the Netflix shows, did was absolutely offer, like these different aesthetics, right? I mean, at least like if you think about the first season of Daredevil versus Jessica Jones versus Luke Cage, I didn't watch Iron Fist, fuck off, but like they deliberately are presenting 3 different kinds and styles and places in New York, right? It's very interesting that the series were allowed to construct those like very vibrant worlds. I have nothing smart to say about Blade. Like this movie, y'all, I tapped out about 47 times because there was stuff going on that I was like, I cannot take any of this seriously. Not that the movie demands that that we take it seriously. Like there are moments where the movie is like having tremendous fun with itself and encourages you to do the same thing. But this is like hocus pocus, y'all. I wish I had seen this in 1998 so that I would have had a 1998 frame of reference.
Has anyone watched this movie before?
Yeah, I watched it around the time it came out, and as an uncritical, certainly consumer at that time, I kind of liked it. I mean, I enjoyed it as a stylish like exercise. I certainly enjoyed Donald Logue as the cocky, assistant to Deacon Frost or whatever, the right-hand man. Maybe that's a bad choice of words given the focus on his hands and stuff in the film. But, and it's like, and I do think I just at that time I didn't have any perception whatsoever of how shitty this film's like gender politics are, how shitty it's like reinforcement of a very, very repressive kind of masculinity is. I didn't have any of that rattling around in my head. So I was just like, wow, Wesley Snipes is really great in this role. He looks rad as hell. You know, it was just fun to watch. It was just a fun movie. And I still think to this day that opening scene is extremely effective. Like the club, the secrecy of the club, and then like the build up, and then the blood coming from the sprinklers. Like it really works. Like it's a very effective kind of opening for this film.
Very important question about that scene. If you were in a club and some liquid dropped from the ceiling onto you, would you taste it?
Oh no! When the hapless white dude tasted it, I was like, "No,
why would you do that?" So I had never seen this movie before, and I had kind of wanted to. I was curious about it, but I've now seen it twice in the same amount of months. Like I watched this during lockdown, and so I was not really very excited to watch it again, but like felt like I had to be, to have anything to say, right? I didn't remember the like details of it. And I was kind of reading a little bit about it while I was watching it, kind of, in the background or whatever. And Roger Ebert's review really like helped me look at it a little bit differently, just because I, again, wasn't so taken with it the first time. And so just reminding me, or having someone remind me, that this is a superhero movie that's very rooted in superhero life of like, and again, before the MCU, before like superhero movies were such a huge thing, it made me look at it differently. And it didn't make me look at it differently and be like, that's a great movie, but it let me, all of the things that I want to be annoyed about not in terms of like gender politics or, masculinity and all of that, but in terms of like the cartoonish nature of it, I just kind of let that all go. And I was able to enjoy the movie in a different way, I guess, if that makes sense, right? Where I was like, that dialogue is stupid. That's overacting. This is whatever, blah, blah, blah. Like all of that shit. I was like, whatever. It's supposed to be like this.
Yes. Yeah.
And that helped me barrel through it again a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, when I say that I have nothing smart to say about this movie, that's absolutely accurate. So I apologize to anybody listening to this episode and trying to figure out what my point is, because I don't have one. But I will say that one of the reasons why I never watched it when it came out was because I just have never been particularly interested in vampires as like a supernatural species. And there's a whole host of reasons why that is. But, the ones that most pertinent to my consumption of this movie is that our vampire stories, certainly the most famous and mainstream ones, are really about class in ways that don't get unpacked enough. And so, like the vampire is often, an avatar of like old world elegance, luxury, aristocracy, and then the folks, sort of like allied against the vampire. There's often questions about like, like their race or their ethnicity. They tend to be from like the working classes or the middle classes. And so like there's this allure that's built into the figure of the vampire that just is tiresome to me in a lot of ways, so I'm just like, whatever.
I love Ebony over here being like, I have nothing smart to say.
Right, I know, right?
I don't. I don't.
I was like,
what I'm telling you is like, this is why I, took so long to see this movie. But so what I found interesting about this movie, one of the few things, is that it's not set in Europe, right? Like so many of our, famous vampire tales are set, understandably, in Europe. But this is set in America. It's set in, this alternative universe, LA, with a bloodbath club, with, like secret, clubs where you enter them through fridges, which I did find very cool. But I think there's something very interesting when you pull like the vampire mythos out of old world Europe and then map it somewhere else. And so like I was really interested in how you have like all of these different, like the Vampire Council, for instance, and you have all these different dudes on the Vampire Council. I think maybe one woman, but they're all, ostensibly from somewhere else. And I'm like, why do y'all meet here? Like, what is it about like LA?
Right.
That, you see what I'm saying? Like, I'm not trying to pick the part of the movie for this. I'm not saying this is the plot or anything, but I'm just like, why here? Why is it that you wouldn't be like in Paris or, Johannesburg or wherever?
Well, I think it is interesting that clearly the vampires here with that high council are very much associated with like wealth and power. We can imagine that maybe they're in LA. I think they're a global outfit, right? The idea with them being such a diverse group is that they're like representatives from enclaves like all over the globe, right? Or something like that. But probably they have their hands in the entertainment business or, whatever. Like we can speculate about all that. The film doesn't spell any of it out, but clearly like the vampires are very much like, they are elite. Like they are elite. They are wealthy. They are powerful. You have Udo Kier as like
always value
who's
for money.
Always and like interesting for casting for me as the head of the council, because he is an actor who I think of him kind of as, to me anyway, he is the closest thing we have to a modern day Peter Lorre, and where there's something a little queer coded about his his performance, his affect, everything. But what's also interesting to me is then you have Deacon Frost, right? This young upstart or whatever.
Stephen Dorff,
yes.
He makes me laugh.
And like what I guess what's interesting to me about that dynamic is it almost sort of ends up being this thing where it almost seems like if Deacon Frost hadn't come along and like destabilized things, things wouldn't be as bad as they are. And therefore, to me, it's like the analogy in my head for that whole dynamic is that like, oh, Deacon Frost is like the Trump is the Trump figure, and the council is like the good Republic, the quote unquote
the
good
Lincoln
Republicans
Project?
or whatever. Like if things would have been fine if he just hadn't come and destabilized. Like they're the Lincoln Project, right, or whatever.
Yeah.
Or like oh, you just had to come and when no, like they're absolutely terrible too, right? And we shouldn't whatever. Like, I don't know. There was just something about that dynamic where it's like the destabilizing force that comes along that, to thwart the also evil, deeply fucked up like force that already exists and is like deeply entrenched or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely brings like a minor what am I trying to say? A little minor depth to the narrative. It's not just like good versus bad. It's like good versus two phases of bad.
Yeah.
Right. Like the tension between whether you're pure-blooded or you are turned, which is interesting. Like I don't see a lot of vampire mythology that has like pure blood versus turned. Like it's usually just age. Like you have to be turned at some point. So I thought that was like, I don't know, interesting in quotes. Like I didn't really give a shit about any of it, but
Sure.
it's just like the movie would have been shorter if you had taken all that out. What I found interesting that I didn't really take in on the first viewing was how deeply Asian representation and culture is the backdrop of this film.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I actually Googled to be like, did anyone write about this? Is there any discussion of this? And everything came up about Blade Runner because when you type Blade, yeah. So I don't really know what it is, but there is a little bit of like the fighting scenes are definitely influenced by like, Asian fighting, like kung fu movie films, right? There's that, but it also like there's scenes in Chinatown in Los Angeles when when there's the outside confrontation between Blade and Frost that is in Chinatown in LA. And when they're talking about humans, like in general, they're showing shots of Asian people in Chinatown, right? Or in that area. And then you have the Asian nightclub with like the businessmen and the sort of quote unquote schoolgirls. It just, I couldn't really make sense of that choice. I don't think it's necessarily bad, but it feels very intentional because you don't usually have a background or backdrop of people who aren't white without thinking about it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that I liked, going back to what Carol was saying about the creation of Blade's world, is that I loved how effortlessly multicultural and diverse the world was. So as is accurate about an urban environment, there are people of all different, backgrounds there. So like, he would be in one scene, he'd be standing in front of like, some bodegas and, like as you said, there's scenes in Chinatown and nothing is made of that as if it's something startling. It's just, this is the city. These are the people who populate the city. But speaking of, how important like Asian culture and Asian people are, but in the background for this film. So, I watch all movies with captions if they're available. And I was so frustrated because in that scene in the nightclub, there's, like these businessmen talking and the schoolgirl group rapping. And the captions just say Asian language.
Oof.
I saw that.
And I was just like, what the fuck? Like, seriously? That's all you can do? And of course, later, in the film, like at the very end, Blade's in Moscow and it's like, Russian language. And I was like, you could provide more information. It's just clearly the information is, you don't feel the need to be specific, when we're talking about certain groups of people. It was so irritating and fucked up.
Yeah. I mean, I like that. I like that this isn't a world of white people, right? This isn't a Los Angeles of just white people. But it's a Los Angeles of like some Black people and some Asian people, right? Like that's not like LA in general. So it was just, I don't know if anyone like has background on like the comics or on the filmmaking of this, like I'd be really curious about that specific choice just because it was clearly very intentional.
Yeah. And I also wanted to know, like, speaking of that, La Magra, the vampire god, so much of like, the speech and the rituals and stuff are in some Slavic language, but the vampire god that they're trying to rouse is called La Magra. And I was like, okay, where is this god from? Are you trying to suggest that this is like, a Mexican god, which would make sense? They're in LA, right? I just wanted more of that. Like, you don't have to patch every hole, but I just need some answers.
Yeah. So, yeah, totally. I think that there are like a bunch of things to unpack here around like gender and fat shaming and
God.
There's a lot of stuff. So like while it is a film that is like, there are lots of people of color in it, which at the time, I guess, is like something to celebrate-ish. Like it stars a Black superhero, which, was never, you don't get a lot of mainstream Black superheroes in general, especially then. We still don't. What the fuck am I talking about?
Right? Yeah, we're like one MCU film centered on a Black superhero comes out and it's like the biggest deal ever.
Yeah,
like when it should by now be, pretty standard, right? Yes. So.
Yeah, totally. So, okay, Chris Christopherson plays Whistler.
Yes.
Which is hilarious and wonderful. And Whistler is like buddies with Blade, like they work together. Whistler's family was murdered by vampires, and so now he spends his life dedicated to like building gadgets to fight them or whatever. Carolyn, you brought up the masculinity a little bit earlier. Like maybe we can dive into that because their relationship is so frustrating.
It's so frustrating but also like as I was watching this film, it was like this reminder of like, oh, this is literally like exactly and I mean exactly the same like kind of masculinity, sort of depiction of masculinity and like details around masculinity and that were like absolutely ubiquitous in, say, video games of like the early 2000s, right? Ares from God of War, Dante, whatever, and all those dudes that went on those vengeance quests because their families got murdered and everything. But so this film, like the oh my God, it's so frustrating. Like there's that scene where gosh, we haven't even mentioned Karen yet.
I figured we were gonna like get into the messy, complicated women of this movie.
Yeah, so
but like the masculinity stuff, like just for example, when you find spoilers that Whistler dies or is dying, he like literally these two people clearly care about each other and love each other and have like Whistler's like a father to Blade, right? Like that is they have reiterated that verbally many times. And the last thing that Whistler says to him is "Walk away, you stupid son of a bitch."
Yeah, and of course, and he stoically walks away. The music swells, right? It's like this kind of slow motion, like serious walk away shot or whatever. And the music swells to suggest like the depth of feeling in Blade's heart, but he doesn't like betray any of it. As Whistler has to like, do the like ultra manly thing of killing himself. But so what I was going to say with Karen is that earlier she has a little conversation with Blade where she tries to like get a little bit of human emotion out of him with regard to Whistler. And, she says like, you care about him a lot, basically. And he says something like, we have a good arrangement. He makes the weapons, I use them. And she says, my mother used to say a cold heart is a dead heart. And it's this line that, ostensibly it's sort of, she's like critiquing Blade for being so unfeeling. But the film absolutely like his lack of emotional affect is absolutely crucial to this film's like glorifying of him and presenting him as like this incredible badass. Right? It's not, there is no critique happening here. It is pure, like, absolute, like, revelry in that kind of, that stoic, standard of masculinity. And of course it's laced with, misogyny. I mean, there's a moment where, Blade says to Frost, who's wearing like SPF 50,000 sunblock, he says like your mascara's running. Later, when Frost knocks Blade down for a minute, he says like you're a little bitch. So it's always like reinforced by there is obviously that like how do we define ourselves as men? Well, by hating women for one thing, and by not showing like actual human emotion.
Yeah, and in fact, showing human emotion is, like the one soft spot that Blade has, which is his, memories of his mother.
Oh my God.
And the vengeance that he carries, in honor of his mother is ultimately used against him, right? Like, it turns out, surprise. Listen, if you don't know what happens in this movie, who cares? This movie's 20 years old at this point. But so turns out his mom is still alive. His mom is now allied with, Deacon Frost, aka Chris Angel, aka Scott Stapp from Creed. And like, it is Blade's one weak spot, and she is able to exploit that. Deacon is able to exploit that, as if to suggest, like, no, Blade is effective only insofar as he has completely divorced himself from, feeling anything for anyone.
So, okay. Look, one, his mom died in childbirth. So those memories, like where we keep seeing the mom, what the fuck? You wouldn't actually.
He's a vampire. Anita, nope. Just let it.
And then also the fact that the mom was like Eric, like as if she would recognize her adult child that she's never seen before.
Right.
Like
presumably, like, he's Blade, he's famous, right? So she's probably been checking in on him, like, reading the newsletter, and being like, "Oh, look at how my son turned out."
People have really heralded like Wesley Snipes like playing this role, and he was like the desired actor to play this role when they were casting it. And I think when we get into this masculinity stuff that we're like that Carolyn was just talking about, it shows like I can't really celebrate his acting in this. Like there isn't a lot of nuance. Like the idea is that he's this tortured figure and so boring, whatever. But even if I take away the, like, I'm bored of that in general, in terms of like, the only reason that we know that he's tortured is because the movie fucking tells us. Like, it's not because he has like some nuanced performance. He's just this fucking stoic, violent dude. And, not to disparage him completely in this, but like, really, like the scene that you talked about, Carolyn, where he just walks away and the music swells, like, it's not like there was like a twitch on his face or something that would convey like any kind of emotion here,
right. I still think he's perfectly cast because he looks I just can't imagine anyone looking as cool in this role as he did.
But like another example is when Blade first sees Karen, she's bit and dying, and he probably would have killed her. That was insinuated that he would have killed her so she didn't turn into a vampire. You get a flash of his mom, the scene that he would never have actually remembered. But you get a flash of his mom, and so he sees this black woman around his mom's age, and like, he wants to save her. And so it's not that you saw him like feeling emotion, it's that they just showed a flashback and you put two and two together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just like little things like that I'm just like, whatever. And again, like I said at the top of the show, I like forgave a lot of this stuff in the second watch through because I was like superhero movies and from the 90s. But at the same time, like, it's still it's troubling.
I mean, I feel like because it's now, like if this movie came out today, I would be tweeting so much anger about like its gender politics and everything because it's like 22 years old, which is, not to say that it's culturally like inert at this point, but I can regard it more as like a cultural artifact of the time. And like, not that these ideas by any means have been dispersed or dismantled at all. But, I don't feel like this film is, I don't feel like the film would have been made quite this way today. Right.
No, I don't think so either.
Like, I mean, there's also that to me, like super fascinating and troubling, but fascinating way in which like, right before the big final battle, right? Blade he's weakened, right? He's
oh boy.
And so what happens to enable him to confront Frost?
Carol.
So he has to drink Karen's blood from the open wound on her from when she was bitten previously. And it is clearly a stand-in symbolic sex act, right? In which he consumes the woman, right? The man consumes the woman essentially and thus his power is like unleashed or restored. You know,
can we talk about the enthusiastic consent that happened in this scene? And I'm using that kind of sarcastically here because like she is yelling "Don't stop" over and over and over again. When you're like, and I kept being like, because I had the captions on and I was like, is she saying "Don't stop" or "Stop"? Like this feels really fucking weird, right? Like it's obviously if you want to get into like the mythology of vampire lore and stuff, like sex and like drinking blood is all interconnected, and the what's the word I'm looking for? Like you're not supposed to do it kind of thing.
Right.
But like the fact that she's screaming "Don't stop" for like fucking 10 hours while he's drinking her blood, it was very disturbing.
Well, I mean, I think, that's part of vampire lore that, part of what makes vampires so attractive is that they infuse everything with this sensuality, right? And so in addition to, the access that they give you to like immortality or, super strength or whatever, it's this way of like living carnally that infuses absolutely everything about you. So like, I didn't hate the fact that his drinking from her was essentially a sex scene. I found it hilarious how much of a sex scene it was, and her, moaning, "Don't stop, don't stop, don't stop." It was so, this film does not traffic in any subtleties whatsoever. Like if you wonder if something means what you think it means, it does. Yes. And they're going to underline it and they're going to put a pin in it.
Like the sexy mom times.
Oh man.
What is that? It's just a little, come on. Like the movie, I feel like the movie was kind of like, okay, whatever, fine. And then as soon as they get into like Karen gets kidnapped and they go to the temple thing, it just goes batshit from there. Like that's when when I'm like, oh God, do I have to watch this again? Like everything that happens after that point, I'm just like a massive eye roll.
Oh my God, this film went full tilt boogie and did not go back, like it would just power through.
I read that they made changes to the end because originally Frost turned into this big like blood blob, and the CGI was so bad that audiences didn't like it. So that's why they kept him in his human form. But then, I was like, they really were going for it at the end.
Oh my God. Okay, listen, I wrote a list of things that cracked me up in this movie, starting with like Deacon Frost's high-tech coffin cracked me up. But the end of the movie, like I was just writing down scene after scene when Blade, I don't know who he's fighting in that moment, but when they're doing like alternating roundhouse kicks and kind of dancing. Oh my God. That made me lose my shit. When Blade takes out Quinn and grabs the sunglasses from the air.
Oh yeah.
I had my third or fourth heart attack of the night. When Mercury, the vampire, with like straight out of, like an extra from The Matrix with like the white baby doll dress and the kind of like chunky hair and whatever, when Karen takes her out with the vampire mace and it looks like she's just taking a hit of Banaka, and that lost my shit.
And then her head explodes.
Oh my God. But the thing that really, and I don't know why, I was crying when Udo Kier is, about to be executed by sunlight at the beach, and the sun comes up, and I'm like, oh wait, the other vampires are there. Aren't they gonna die too? And it turns out they're wearing head to toe motorcycle leathers, and they just clip down the motorcycle helmets. Y'all,
right before that, there's a scene in the car where you're like, what the fuck is this scene? Where she's putting sunblock on Frost's face. And then you go out and I thought it was makeup at first, but they reference it being sunblock later. And I was like, y'all, so you just put on some fucking concealer and you're good to go? Like, what's your problem? Why wouldn't you just be outside all the time?
I was like, why is it such a big deal to be a daywalker if it's so easy to circumvent like these so-called limitations? And then you've got it seems pretty easy.
Yeah, then you get the next scene or whatever, a couple scenes later where they're in the park and he's just standing there in the middle of day. Like Frost is just standing there in the middle of daylight and like they've got sunblock on and you're like, yo, if it, like what?
like Blade is like how is he out here? And then, oh shit, the vampires have discovered the secret of sunblock.
This brings up something interesting, though. Like, so if we can transition into our discussion of race, which this film just straight up does not have the range for some of the conversations it's trying to have. But it is kind of interesting to think, like, if, UV light is the problem, like, there is something very interesting about Blade as a Black man being the hero of this film, right? And being, sort of like this beacon of, I don't know, I don't want to say justice really, but surely this kind of like, divine arm that takes out evil. There's something very interesting about having that embodied in a Black man, but this film simply has no idea how to actually talk about race. And so when Frost says something, okay, the whole like idea about being pure blood and being born a vampire versus being turned into one, I wasn't quite sure how that happens. Like, how are pure blood vampires born? Whatever, that's not the point. The point is, the film tries to suggest something about race. And so when Deacon talks to Blade, he's like, you need to be honest with your blood. These people will never accept you. Like, don't be an Uncle Tom out here. I was like, no. No, you don't got the range to have this conversation. Like, first of all, it's always suspect when a white person calls a Black person Uncle Tom, but also you can't map something as complex as like our current attitudes towards race onto this fictional species. Like, it does not work that way.
Yeah, there's definitely like some images in the film that I found like potent and interesting. Like, I think part of what makes the opening dance club scene interesting to me is Blade as this figure, a Black man, standing against a sea of what looked to me like mostly like wealthy white people, like elites. Like, they look to me like trust fund kids or like people, like whatever, they borrow the dad's Mercedes and, whatever. Like, and then, you have like the guy who gives him the serum is like a Black man, and there's like a little hint of like solidarity there, but it's not explored at all. It's and then there's like the few run-ins with security or law enforcement. I mean, there's the security guards that come into the hospital and shoot Blade, right? And he turns around and he's like. He's like surprised, right? He's like, what?
you motherfuckers must be kidding me or whatever.
Right, exactly.
Which is hilarious that he would be surprised.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
And then a short while later, like in Los Angeles, right? There's the figure he's not a vampire, but he's I forget what the term is for him, but he's a cop.
The familiar.
What do they call him?
A familiar.
The familiar.
Familiar, yes. And like Blade kind of drags him out onto the street and like draws a huge gun on him, like a Black man drawing a gun on
in the middle of the street.
In the middle of the street in Los Angeles on a cop, like, and there's no, there's no, like that moment should have been something more than it was.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
The show, like like both of you are saying, this movie doesn't acknowledge race in ways that it could have.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
Even though
it doesn't acknowledge it when it should, but then tries to introduce it in other ways in which it's not quite
metaphorically.
In which it's not quite as sure-footed as it thinks it is.
One thing before we like wrap up this conversation is I do want to talk a little bit more about Karen, and not that there's like a ton to talk about with her, but I'm interested in Karen for what she could have been. More so than what she actually was, because you have, she's a hematologist. Like, she is a smart, like, professional woman who gets pulled into this underworld and is like gonna find a cure and like gonna figure that shit out. And I'm like, go, like, dude, that's cool, man. Like, good for you for like not taking shit and just being like, yeah, I'm freaked out, but also like I'm gonna roll with the punches and like come in and change shit. And like, I don't know if the other Blade movies, like, I imagine she's in them. I don't think know.
She is. I never saw them, but when I looked this up on Wikipedia, it indicated that she was only in this film.
Really?
Yes.
That's such a shame, because I feel like she could have just been this, like, she could have taken over like Whistler's role or something,
and it sort
right?
of indicates that, like, make me a better serum. She's going to move into some kind of like partner, type role or whatever. But I don't know. I guess that didn't happen.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I just thought like when I watched it, I was like, oh God, she's going to be this horrible, like, I thought she was going to be worse than she was. And because we got that little bit, I wanted more from her.
You're right.
So, as Blade said, some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Jesus. I wanted there to be one kind of like quippy aphorism I could take from this movie on par with Wesley Snipes' famous "Always Bet on Black," but there was just nothing for me.
Nope.
Womp womp.
All right, y'all. We'll be right back with our freakouts. You know something you can do today? You can head over to patreon.com/femfreak and become one of our patrons. That's right. If you back this podcast, not only are you helping us keep it on the air and keep feminist critical media criticism alive, but you also get loads of fun perks like early access to podcast episodes, very special bonus episodes, merch discounts. What else you got? We even let our patrons help us decide on new episodes and upcoming topics. So go ahead and check that out. Patreon.com/femfreak. What's your freak out? Now it's time to talk about what's been thrilling us, moving us, upsetting us, or infuriating us this past week. I want to thank all of our patrons who had a really lovely conversation and shared their thoughts based on our freak out last week about language and gendered use of language. And so thank you. It was lovely to read those comments and hear your thoughts on it. Mm-hmm. If you want to be a patron and participate in those conversations, you can at patreon.com/femfreak, which you probably just heard me say, but I don't remember exactly because that was recorded another time. Anyways, Carolyn, what are you freaking out about?
I want to talk about, it's been a long time, I feel like, since I talked about a video game on this podcast. So I want to talk about a video game that I've been playing an awful lot of lately. And this will come as no surprise to people who follow game discourse or whatever. A lot of people are talking about this game, really loving this game right now. But so the latest game from Supergiant, who have previously made Bastion and Transistor and Pyre in particular, I was a huge fan of. Their new game is called Hades. And Hades it was in early access for, I think like 2 years, but it only recently had its like full 1.0 like official release where the game is now basically complete, though they're still patching it and, tweaking it and whatnot. This game is really, really impressive. So it's a game in which you play through the same areas and the same content like over and over again, right? It's broadly termed. It's what's often categorized as like a roguelike, where roguelikes are games that usually you play through the same content again and again, and you die, and then you have to start over from the beginning, and it has that aspect to it. I guess I should say roguelite, technically, not roguelike. Sorry, gamers. But like what makes Hades, and the combat, the action, the gameplay is excellent, right? But what makes Hades, what elevates Hades beyond just being like, another game with great, like really compulsively playable, action, is the writing and the characters and the way the concept of the game ties in is so seamlessly tied to the action. So you play as a character named Zagreus, who is the son of Hades, the ruler, the god of the dead, or the god of the realm of the dead. And you, for reasons that aren't entirely clear when you start playing the game, you want to escape from the realm of the dead, your father's realm. And so as you do that, you progressively like form deeper and deeper relationships with so many characters, and they're all so wonderfully written and so distinctive, and the art for them is so fantastic. and they have such vibrant personalities, and the voice acting is so incredible, and everything that what really keeps me coming back, and a lot of people coming back to this game, is just the development of those relationships and those dynamics, and the unfolding of plot lines that occur that concern some of their relationships with each other, and things like that. And it's all very much rooted in Greek mythology, but but it feels very, very fresh and modern and current. I mean, it's very some have described the game as having a queer gaze to the art, and maybe you could say to the writing as well. There are questions that push back, or others who kind of push back against that and say, well, there aren't any like fat characters except for like a fat enemy type, and that's a very valid criticism. But like it's also a conversation that I think even 10 years ago we wouldn't have even been having, because we wouldn't have had a game that was as kind of queer friendly in its gaze and in its art and its tone and everything as this game is, at least not at this level of like mainstream acceptance and popularity and whatnot. So yeah, like the other wonderful thing about the game is that failure is sort of built in to the design of the game, in the sense that dying doesn't feel it doesn't feel like punishing, really. It doesn't feel it's not like too disheartening. There's almost something rewarding in a way. Like even if you die, it feels like, it almost feels like, oh well, that's kind of supposed to happen, and now I'm back. Now that too advances the story, and so you get these sort of tangible, the gameplay rewards of like, oh, I'm making my character more powerful, etc. But that in and of itself doesn't interest me, right? It's what makes the game rewarding, and what makes continuing to play it rewarding for me is the deepening relationships that your character develops with the other characters in the game. So hats off to Supergiant Games for another really great game, and for the outstanding writing in particular, and voice acting, and just the craft, the art, the craft that went into Hades. It's really impressive.
Nice. I have seen the game, and I have heard a lot of people really enjoy it. So it was nice to hear you talk about it. I want to freak out about a book that I really enjoyed. It's called The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North. I'm sure I've talked about Claire North on this podcast before. She wrote a book called 84K that I just thought was absolutely brilliant. And then I've probably also talked about The End of the Day. So this is the third book of hers that I'm reading. And she's so creative and visionary in her storytelling. And this one did not fail me. It did not. What's the word I'm looking for? Disappoint. Thank you. The book did not fail me. So the story is about Harry August, and he is a human who, when he dies at the end of his life, he just gets reborn again. Mm-hmm. And he gets reborn in the exact same way, same conditions, same time, same period, every time. So, same, he grows up with the same family, and he dies at the end of his life again. And then, it goes on and on and on. So this is the story of the first 15 of his lives. And it's told in this way that is just like, it maps through like all of his different lives at different times. So it's not like it's like one story, one life, and then the next, and then the next, and then the next. And it is, I think it's like lovely and wonderful on its own, but it just gets you really thinking about like, what would you do if you had many lives, right? Like, and you see him do that, right? You see him like decide to take up different careers or learn different things. You learn that like having relationships can be difficult because you can't share this thing about you. And if you do, then you'll get locked up into a like, at the time, I think he's born in the 20s, get locked up as if he's crazy, and be put on all these drugs and stuff like that. And so it was really, really interesting. And then the story, as you're like getting a handle on like, cool, he lives all these lives. Oh shit, there are other people like him, right? And then there's this whole like time society. They call themselves the Chronos Club, and they share communication through time, right? Like they literally write on stones to share things back from previous times or from the future, and then you like reset. And so it makes you think about time differently, because you might have to wait, your entire lifetime to learn something until you're like born again, right? Wow. And then also it's interesting because like you have to go through puberty again and again, but you have all your memories as if you were an adult. And so like it's just fascinating, right? And you watch these people make the same mistakes in their life again and again. I loved it. The story, it's not just that though. The story then develops into like an actual adventure through time and through this relationship with another person who is doing things to the timeline that you don't agree with or that he doesn't agree with, and trying to confront that. And it's just so good, y'all. Like I really, really loved it. So I highly recommend it. I've now read 3 books of hers, and I clearly recommend her in general. So The First 15 Lives of Harry August by Claire North.
Oh.
Yeah. You can submit your own freak out at feministfrequency.com/freakout. Thank you so much for listening to Feminist Frequency Radio. News updates is that Star Trek Discovery is back. And you know what that means? The Star Trek Feminist Frequency podcast is back. That was not the right order of words, but it's fine. Anyways, the episode our Star Trek episode is out now as you're listening to this for the first episode of Discovery. And we are releasing episodes every 2 weeks with awesome guests. So if you're into that, tune in. If you are a patron, it will appear in your feed without you even doing anything. So if you're a Star Trek fan, check it out.
Check it out.
Yeah. And you've missed Ebony's hair reports. I know you have. You're going to You're going to want to tune in for that. Yes, you have.
People have been asking me on Twitter, will the hair report be returning? Of course, my people. Of course. Anita, real quick, can I do a quick shout out?
Yeah.
I just need to shout out Tony Marie and Angel. Good on you for being flexible with me while I needed to reschedule. You asked in payment for a shout out. Here it is.
All right.
Okay.
There you go. Yeah. I can be bought is the message for the audience.
Great. I don't know the context for that, but that's okay.
It was legit. Like it wasn't anything criminal. Don't worry.
No. Doesn't matter to me. We can be a criminal enterprise. It's fine.
Okay.
Don't tell anyone though.
People think we are already. So hey.
Yeah.
Ooh, it's true. It's fine. Ebony and Carolyn and I are going to start our secret time traveling club, and we're gonna play with the time.
Wait, we have to go through puberty over and over again? No, ma'am.
We don't have to. We're gonna create our own club, and we can determine the rules of the club.
Oh, okay, cool. That's definitely a rule. No going through puberty more than once.
I know. Could you imagine having to do that? Ugh. Could you imagine going through puberty right now with everything that you know? Like the fascinating thing about the book too is that like as a part of the club, there are people and members who will like get you out of your living situation. So like, sending letters and being like, they have been accepted on full scholarship to this boarding school so that you like get away from your family and shit like that because it's just too much,
Right.
It's fascinating.
I should be clear. It's not puberty that's the problem. It's childhood in general. Like, I don't want to relive the first 20 years of my life,
Do you want to be a 4-year-old? I'm just going to have to
go through doing the same shit over and over again.
Do you want to be a 4-year-old that has full memory of everything that you experienced in your previous life, but being talked to like a 4-year-old? That sounds brutal.
Yeah.
Anyways, stay tuned for the freaking after party.
Okay.
It'll be like this. This is basically what the bonus is like. And it's only available to backers of this podcast. So head over to patreon.com/femfreak to learn more. This show is engineered by Rob Para. Carrie Stimson provides technical support, artwork by Jamie Varon, and our intro music is by Phil Circus. Join us next week for The Witches of Eastwick as we continue our Halloween month, witches and vampires theme. So, bye.
Later.
Bye.